2019 was a year marred by major protests around the globe, and one of the most intense happened in Hong Kong. The territory is set to welcome the new year with fresh rounds of demonstrations. Greg Gregorio gives us a look back to the Hong Kong unrest in 2019 with this report.
An extradition bill. This was all it took to spark months of massive unrest in Hong Kong, known to be the biggest series of protests since the territory was handed over by Britain to Chinese sovereignty in 1997. Back in February, Hong Kong's Security Bureau proposed amendments to Hong Kong's extradition laws, a measure that will allow criminal suspects to be sent to mainland China for trial. Early protests against the measure sparked from late March to April, with tens of thousands of protesters demanding the scrapping of these proposed amendments. By May, pro-democracy lawmakers found themselves in a scuffle over the extradition bill against Beijing loyalists in Hong Kong's Legislative Council. But Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam herself was firm in pushing for the bill's passage. Later on, the Hong Kong government tried to meet critics halfway by proposing limits to the bill, including a limited scope of extraditable offenses. But protesters had none of it and insisted on the scrapping of the measure. Anti-government demonstrations became even more massive from June to July, with over 1 million Hong Kong residents already calling for the scrapping of the bill. June saw the onset of violent protests. Protesters clad in black took to the streets and choked major thoroughfares. Police forces started firing rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse demonstrations. Protesters hit back with petrol bombs. These soon prompted Lam to announce the suspension of the bill. But protesters are still not happy, saying the proposal had to be scrapped altogether. On top of this, critics also started calling for Lam's resignation. The unrest took a more violent turn with the infamous mob attack at the Yuen Long MTR station on July 21. Some 100 armed men, clad in white t-shirts, attacked MTR passengers, including activists and the media, following a clash between the police and protesters earlier that day. It took an hour before police arrived at the scene. Several people were hospitalized because of injury. In August, violent clashes continued between the police and protesters. In September, Lam finally gave in to pressure and declared the withdrawal of the controversial bill.
I will invite community leaders, professionals, and academics to independently examine and review society's deep-seated problems and to advise the government on finding solutions. After more than 2 months of social unrest, it is obvious to many that this contentment extends far beyond the bill. It covers political, economic, and social issues.
But for protesters, the move came a little too late. Protests continued to intensify, with students and more demonstrators disrupting airport operations and building barricades on the streets. The original movement against the bill has expanded to include 4 other demands: an independent investigation into alleged police brutality, release of arrested protesters, retraction of the word riot in describing protests, and a truly democratic election. In essence, demonstrators are now demanding full democracy over the territory. Amid the chaos, Chinese President Xi Jinping said he will continue to implement a one-country, two-systems policy in Hong Kong and Macau, giving the 2 city-states a high degree of autonomy.
Forging ahead, we must remain committed to the strategy of peaceful reunification and one country, two systems. We will maintain long-term prosperity and stability of Hong Kong and Macau, advance the peaceful development of cross-strait relations, unite the whole country, and continue to strive for the complete unification of our country.
On October 1, just as the Communist Party of China was celebrating its 70th founding anniversary, protesters took to the streets of Hong Kong again. On that day, a police officer shot at a protester in close range. The rest of the month saw Hong Kong streets turned into a battleground. In November, all eyes turned to Hong Kong Polytechnic University as it turned into a virtual war zone. For days, protesters holed up in the school premises while police kept their watch outside and launched a siege. The unrest also took a toll on Hong Kong's economy, with the Asian financial hub sliding into a recession for the first time in a decade during the third quarter. By November, South China Morning Post reports that nearly 4,500 people have been arrested in connection to anti-government protests. The biggest silver lining came for demonstrators on November 24, when pro-democracy candidates won by a landslide in Hong Kong's local elections. Lam said she will listen humbly to the voice of her people, but China still believes that any attempts to create chaos in Hong Kong and jeopardize its prosperity and stability will not be successful. The intensity of protest has somewhat dissipated, but Hong Kong's younger generation, who has been at the forefront of the street movement, wants China to keep its hands off the financial city. And perhaps their bigger worry is what kind of Hong Kong they'll inherit once its special administrative status expires in 2047. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.